Here are the top 10 largest economies in the world over the past 30 years. Back in 1993, Japan held the second position, but by 2023, it had dropped to fourth. Optimists might argue that this isn't a big deal. Japan is still one of the world's leading powers. But let's take a closer look at Japan's GDP during this period. It has barely grown. In fact, if we adjust for inflation, the number might even have declined. Meanwhile, in Asia, China and India have risen dramatically. China has surged from 7th place to become the world's second largest economy, trailing only the United States. India, which didn't even make the top 10 in 1993, now sits right behind Japan and is poised to surpass it in the near future. So what happened to Japan? How did the once economic miracle of the world find itself in this situation? Has Japan truly become poorer? Let's delve into this story in today's video. Before we realize that Japan's economic growth slowed from the 1990s onward, let's take a step back and explore how Japan achieved an extraordinary economic boom after World War II. Following the war, Japan wasn't just a defeated nation. It faced devastating destruction on every front. Major cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Hiroshima were left in ruins. Yet, from this rubble, Japan rose to become the world's second-largest economy by the 1970s. This era is often referred to as the Japanese economic miracle. But how did they achieve it? The first factor was support from the United States. The Dodge Plan and Marshall Aid not only provided critical financial assistance, but also introduced key economic reforms. At the same time, the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 turned Japan into a crucial logistics hub for the U.S. military. This was a golden opportunity for Japan to boost production and attract foreign capital. Domestically, Japan's reform policies were indispensable. The government redistributed land to farmers, increasing agricultural productivity. Simultaneously, they heavily invested in education to build a highly skilled workforce. With an industrialization strategy, Japan focused on sectors like steel, chemicals, and, notably, electronics, the foundation of its later economic explosion. However, it was Japan's export-driven strategy that truly fueled its miracle. Instead of relying on the domestic market, Japan aimed to compete on the global stage. Products like Toyota cars and Sony electronics offered not only superior quality, but also competitive pricing, allowing Japan to rapidly capture international markets. Another critical element was Japan's work culture. With a strong sense of responsibility and discipline, Japanese workers consistently strived for excellence. Businesses adopted the Kaizen model, which emphasized continuous improvement, reducing waste, and optimizing production. The government also encouraged Japanese companies to form alliances to resist foreign competitors. These alliances, known as keiretsu, tightly linked corporations with banks and other businesses in their group, creating financial stability and strength. Alongside these efforts, Japan made substantial investments in infrastructure, building modern transportation systems and large-scale industrial zones. This accelerated urbanization, with workers flocking to major cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, boosting production and consumption. Economic growth was accompanied by a population boom. Between 1950 and 1975, Japan's population increased by 35%. This young, healthy, and abundant workforce fueled the expansion of industries. Thanks to the effective synergy between policies, culture, and development strategies, Japan began to reap extraordinary rewards. Japan's GDP grew at explosive rates, sometimes hitting double digits, rising from $20 billion in 1950 to over $4.3 trillion by 1995. GDP per capita also surged by nearly 220 times during this period, cementing Japan as the world's second-largest economy. This remarkable growth was not just a national achievement, but but also an economic lesson for many other countries worldwide. But could Japan sustain this trajectory forever? The answer lies in the years that followed, marked by new challenges, the collapse of the economic bubble. By the late 1980s, Japan was experiencing a period of incredible dynamism, an economic bubble era where real estate and stock market prices soared to unprecedented heights. But, like a balloon inflated beyond its limit, this golden age came to a painful end. What went wrong so ice? The first culprit was Japan's fiscal and monetary policies. In the late 1980s, the Bank of Japan aggressively lowered interest rates to stimulate growth. This led to a surge in borrowing and uncontrolled investments in real estate and the stock market. Within just a few years, real estate prices reached absurd levels. At its peak, land in central Tokyo was valued higher than all real estate in the entire United States. But this bubble couldn't last forever. By the early 1990s, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates to curb inflation. This decision caused everything to unravel. Another factor was the accumulation of bad debt within the banking system. When the bubble burst, asset values plummeted, rendering mortgage-backed loans worthless. Japanese banks found themselves buried under mountains of bad debt with no way out. Struggling to survive, these banks caused a credit crunch, paralyzing the economy. The banking system, akin to a broken-down engine, dragged Japan's economy into years of stagnation. The issues didn't stop there. A shift in consumer behavior further deepened Japan's stagnation. People began saving more and spending less, creating a vicious cycle. As consumers cut back, businesses reduced investments, leading to slower economic growth. Equally significant was the lack of decisive policy reform. The Japanese government's delayed response to the crisis prolonged the recovery, making the ordeal more painful. During the lost decade, from 1991 to 2000, Japan's economy barely moved. Economist Paul Krugman once remarked, "Japan was shackled by its own decisions. They failed to take bold actions to break free from stagnation." After the lost decade, Japan made significant efforts to revive its economy, but recovery proved to be anything but straightforward. GDP growth, which had once reached double digits during Japan's boom years, dwindled to a mere 1 to 2% annually. Meanwhile, nations like the US, China, and India surged ahead, widening the gap. Yet this was just the tip of the iceberg. To tackle the crisis, the Japanese government heavily relied on issuing bonds to inject capital into the economy. This led to a staggering public debt, reaching over 260% of GDP by 2023, the highest among developed nations. To put it into perspective, Japan's public debt was twice that of the US, and nearly 3 times the average debt level of EU countries. Although most of this debt is domestically held, it remains a significant strain on the national budget. Another factor contributing to Japan's prolonged stagnation was persistently low inflation, or near zero inflation, for decades. While high inflation often raises concerns for many countries, excessively low inflation, or deflation, is equally perilous. Flat or falling prices encourage people to delay spending, which reduces demand and discourages businesses from expanding production. This vicious cycle of deflation and low consumer spending has shackled Japan's economy for years, preventing it from regaining the robust growth it once enjoyed. A demographic crisis is among the greatest modern challenges facing Japan. For decades, Japan's birth rate has fallen to alarmingly low levels. In 1970, Japanese women had an average of 2 children, but by 2023, that number had dropped to just 1.3, one of the lowest rates globally. Japan's population peaked at 128 million in 2008 and declined to 125 million by 2022. If this trend continues, projections estimate Japan's population will plummet to 63 million by 2025-2100, half of the 2022 figure. The causes of this decline are complex. High work pressure, expensive child-rearing costs, and a growing trend of delaying or forgoing marriage have led many young Japanese to postpone or abandon plans to have children altogether. While the birth rate drops, Japanese life expectancy remains one of the highest in the world, averaging 85 years. As a result, Japan's population is aging at an unprecedented pace. Over 28% of the population is aged 65 and older, and this figure is expected to rise further. With a shrinking workforce and a rapidly aging population, Japan faces a daunting challenge. The labor force is contracting, social welfare costs are soaring, and domestic consumer demand is waning. These factors combine to create a vicious cycle, further entrenching the stagnation of Japan's economy. During its economic boom, Japan was synonymous with industrial giants like Sony, Toyota, and Panasonic. However, the wave of globalization in the 1990s reshaped international competition, leaving Japan struggling to keep pace. China, leveraging its low production costs, swiftly emerged as the world's factory. Meanwhile, South Korean brands like Samsung and Hyundai rose to prominence, capturing market share not only in Asia, but also on the global stage. While international competitors relentlessly innovated, improved technology, and optimized costs, many Japanese companies clung to traditional business models, showing little flexibility and lagging in innovation. Although Japan is still recognized for its advanced technology, its research and development investments are often spread across traditional industries rather than focusing on emerging sectors like information technology and artificial intelligence. Domestic challenges compound the issue. Small and medium-sized enterprises in Japan struggle with accessing capital, expanding markets, and adapting to new technologies. Many family-run businesses, lacking successors, have been forced to close. Additionally, bureaucratic red tape and a workplace culture prioritizing seniority over performance have hindered productivity and made it difficult to attract young talent. In technology and manufacturing, rivals like the US and South Korea have outpaced Japan in many areas. Apple has become the emblem of 21st century technology. Samsung dominates the smartphone market, and Japan has largely faded from the forefront of new tech industries. Even in the automotive sector, Japan's traditional stronghold, companies like Toyota and Honda are losing ground in the electric vehicle race. US and Chinese competitors are leading the charge in green and environmentally friendly technologies. Under mounting external competition and internal business challenges, Japan has steadily lost its leading position. While it remains a global power, its reluctance to embrace reform and innovation has stalled its progress. Without significant change, it will take a long time for Japan to reclaim its former glory. During its economic boom, Japan's remarkable work ethic became legendary. Hard work, strict discipline, and unwavering dedication to one's company were considered the golden keys to the country's economic miracle. At the time, Japanese employees worked some of the longest hours in the world, leading to the emergence of the term karoshi, death from overwork, a dark byproduct of this admirable dedication. However, starting in the 1990s and 2000s, Japan's work culture began to shift. The younger generation started questioning the value of sacrificing personal life for the sake of exhausting work schedules, unlike their predecessors. Instead of living to work, many young Japanese now choose to work to live. They prioritize work-life balance and are less willing to dedicate their entire lives to a single company, breaking away from the traditional lifetime employment model. Alongside this cultural shift, two concerning trends have emerged. Freeders, individuals who work part-time or temporary jobs. NEETs, those who are not in education, employment, or training. Today, millions of young Japanese avoid full-time employment or the pressures of corporate life altogether. This shift has disrupted the labor market, leading to a shortage of stable, high-quality workers at a time when Japan desperately needs innovation and economic revitalization. Moreover, the rigid seniority-based system still dominates many Japanese companies. Older employees often occupy key positions, leaving younger workers with limited opportunities for advancement and innovation. As a result, the workforce's average age continues to rise, and the lack of fresh perspectives hampers economic progress. Another challenge is the younger generation's growing aversion to risk. Few are willing to pursue entrepreneurship or take on demanding roles, partly due to limited support for startups and inflexible workplace environments. The transformation of Japan's work culture, from overwork to prioritizing balance, the rise of temporary workers, and the persistence of outdated systems, has created a less dynamic environment. Without addressing these issues, Japan's economy faces an uphill battle in regaining its competitive edge. As Japan grappled with decades of economic stagnation following the burst of its economic bubble, a pressing question loomed: how can the economy be revitalized? After nearly 3 decades of searching for answers, one of the most notable reform efforts emerged: Abenomics. In 2012, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe introduced a bold economic strategy dubbed Abenomics, likened to 3 arrows aimed squarely at the heart of Japan's stagnation. The first arrow involved massive monetary easing. The Bank of Japan injected significant liquidity into the economy and kept interest rates near zero. This weakened the yen, making Japanese exports more competitive on global markets and encouraging both investment and spending. The second arrow targeted fiscal stimulus. The government ramped up public spending on infrastructure, such as roads, airports, and public facilities, creating jobs and boosting domestic demand. The third arrow focused on structural reforms. Japan aimed to build a more flexible business environment by encouraging innovation, private investment, and productivity improvements. Abenomics delivered some initial successes. Unemployment dropped to record lows. The stock market experienced a robust recovery. Signs of economic growth began to reappear. However, deep-rooted challenges remained. Japan's aging population and low labor productivity continued to weigh heavily on its long-term prospects. Faced with a shrinking workforce, Japan made a significant move, opening its doors to foreign workers. In a traditionally homogeneous society, this shift marked a bold and challenging step. Key immigration reforms included special visa programs for skilled workers, expansion of the technical intern training program to attract labor from Asian countries such as Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia. These foreign workers not only filled labor gaps but also began to diversify Japan's economy. Reform efforts such as Abenomics and the policy of attracting foreign workers have somewhat breathed new life into Japan's stagnant economy. However, to truly revive, Japan needs to continue to face deeper issues of population, innovation, and reform of corporate culture. Looking back at Japan's economic journey, we can see a resilient country that wrote a miracle after World War II. Can they replicate such success in the 21st century? The answer will depend on the bold steps they take in the years ahead. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay tuned for upcoming videos.